In some of the other lessons, we talked about curating beautiful images and using phenomenal imagery anytime you have the chance to put in photos, to put in images into your work. You need to make sure that the imagery is phenomenal. But when you're dealing with dynamic images, you can't really control that very much. You're not gonna have any control over user-generated content. And even if you are producing a project for a client, you're not really gonna be able to control what they upload into the thing that you designed for them. And chances are they're gonna upload a really crappy image, and chances are users are gonna upload anything and everything. So we need to be prepared for those situations when dynamic images are involved. So let's take a look at a couple of projects where dynamic images are involved, and let's go over some techniques that you can use to really prevent bad things from happening. Okay, this is the 12 Stone iPhone app here. They produce videos every single week for the previous Sunday's message and the next Sunday's message. They film a teaser, and there's just tons and tons of images. And you can see that there's just lots of different thumbnails for all of this type of work. Now these, I'm using their actual thumbnails, so there's not a ton of variety, but you can see that some of them aren't quite as nice as others. Like this scribbly whiteboard, I mean, it's not bad, but it's not as cool as some of the others. And then in their kind of series modules, their internal team creates these big series panels. And a lot of these are really cool, but they're very different. This one's really dark and yellow. This one's pink. We've got this Dr. Seuss looking one. Lots of different versions of dynamic images. And so because this is very, very dynamic, this little module here, this would really end up looking, actually, let's break this out and detach. Let's detach this symbol. What I'm gonna do is delete all of these. Should I delete that? Yeah, that's fine. Just add the same fill here on this one. So this is basically what we're dealing with here. This is the component for the series. And then each one of these is its individual little mini component. And we don't know what images are gonna be uploaded in here. We have an idea. So I've intentionally created 1, 2, 3, 4 different image-based layouts. It's the same layout, but it's all composed of different images. I'm using different thumbnails, because I just want to test to see the variety of the dynamic reality of the images. And it's not always going to work to use unsplash photos. So whenever you can get your hands on actual images, that's going to be the best to test for these scenarios. But these scenarios are ones where the dynamic image is not going to break the design that much, because we're very simply just giving that image a place to live. The thing where you have to be even more careful is in an area like this, where this play button here, you can see it's almost getting lost a little bit on that background. I should probably consider doing like a golden color, or possibly a different kind of background on that. Maybe it's white with a black arrow, or maybe I'm using this red or the gold, something like that. That actually doesn't look that great. Actually, what might be better is if I subtract this shape from that. There we go. That might end up looking a little bit better. You could go 100%, 90, 80, something like that. But you'll see like this, I've got this overlay here. So I've got this, we looked at this in the gradient section. If you missed any of the gradient stuff, go back and look at the utility gradients, things like that. So I've got this overlay here. This is a utility gradient that I'm using. It's going from about 80% or so. Let's see, on the far end, it's 80% going to 0% all the way across the image. And I have very strategically put the gradient. I want all of this stuff right here below. This is all 80% black. And the gradient is really only starting right above this point. So you could tell if I brought this into here, you can see really what's happening there. All of that stuff is 80%. And then I just want the gradient to fade into the image like right in here. So it's like a slightly different version of the utility gradient. The things that we covered in the gradient section, we were kind of bringing the gradient all the way down here. But if we make sure that our gradient starts here above the text, then we can guarantee that any of this stuff, even on a white background, the text is still going to be legible. And we could play around with that play icon if we wanted to, go darker. So even if we have no image, I think it's really important to test like a completely empty state. Now, I don't think it's necessary to design a full true empty state for this particular thing, because this is not like a form field or something that a user is going to be filling out. This is content produced by the client that they're going to fill in here. But even if they use a bright white image, we want to make sure that this is going to be legible, and the gradient is doing all of the work right here. So if we look back at these photos, you can see that this, let me make this, bring this little guy back in. You can see that this photo, we also have to be aware of like where this photo is getting cropped. So I've got different test images in here. So I'm testing the way that different images would look if they were to upload this. And you can see this is not ideal. So we might have to put a little bit of guideline around this. Maybe we write some content, some documentation for the client that's like, hey, don't put somebody's face like right behind the play button, because that just, you know, it looks weird with that right in place. So maybe we just set a little bitty guideline where it's like, you know, offset these a little to the right. If you want to kind of get the maximum bang for your buck with this layout, it's going to be better to put the majority of the image on the right-hand side of that area there, because you can see even if I go this way, it starts to get a little bit heavy on the left side with the text and the image. So that could be another thing that you kind of create with maybe some documentation for clients, or even on personal projects. Like you want to kind of provide the correct amount of negative space for the text if there's someone like right in the foreground. You don't have to worry about that as much with an image like this, because it just looks really cool and it's going to work no matter what. But even this one, like you still need to pay attention to the crop. You know, maybe that white board in the background's not quite as nice as the rest, so maybe you just decide to hide it like that. But this would be mostly for content that you have a little more control over, even though it will be dynamic. Let's look at another project that's pretty much like full user generated content with maybe some smart empty states here. So this is this SmartLine app. It's like a second phone number for your phone, for your business. And you can see here, this is kind of after someone's created their account, just to give you the lay of the land. This is kind of everything that has to do with someone's account. So I've got their account, their business voicemail and business hours are set up. There's some of their settings, and we've got like ways to look at block numbers, camera photo library, new profile photo. So they're going to be selecting 2 images here. And first of all, I've just provided them some smart defaults, and I had to follow the brand guidelines that GoDaddy produced for this. So that's where I got kind of this green image and some of these textured patterns. These were actually inside of the GoDaddy branding library. And so I used some of the app colors in conjunction with these patterns based on their guidelines to create like a decent looking like empty state versus just having a plain background. So it's always worth trying to figure out a pleasant empty state, and it'll take a little bit of creativity, but you can see that this is considered their call paper. So anytime someone calls the phone, they will get a custom wallpaper on the call. So it ends up looking something like this. So this would be like the preview of the background when somebody calls on the phone. So if they want to choose a new call paper, we're providing them with some of these defaults. So these are kind of the GoDaddy branded defaults that they can choose for any of these, but they could also upload a photo or take a photo. And one of the big things that I wanted to prevent would be guaranteed someone's going to upload one of their crappy logos for their business. And if you design this logo or know who did, I'm sorry, but it's just a very odd logo. So this is just an example of what it would look like, a full white background with the logo. So we want to make sure that we're putting a big enough gradient on top of this thing. And otherwise it's going to look like that. And that's just not going to work when you need to overlay the number, who's calling, things like that. So once this is in place, we have this gradient to kind of, it's like a safeguard. All these gradients and these overlays, these are safeguards against the bright white images that are just not going to work. And even on these actual photos, I'm showing what it would look like over here with a little bit of a gradient overlay, but when it actually comes in, I'm still using that exact same gradient on both of these artboards. And that again is just so I can use white text on that background and I know that it's gonna work. So this is another thing that I'm doing here where in addition to the overlay, I realized that the overlay alone was not quite enough. The overlay alone was not quite enough to have this text be fully readable. That just looked kind of messy to me. So I went in and I added a background blur to this overlay. That way it just creates a bit of a smoother separation from the image when that's uploaded. So we made a new rule that there would be an overlay and a 5-pixel background blur on those user uploaded images, primarily so we could just make sure that without a doubt, even if this image right here was completely white, let's go add a white background to this. Let's go right there. So even if this comes in as a bright white image, we still have enough contrast to read that image, and all of this still works even if there's a bright white image uploaded. So it's really, you just kind of have to take care of the extremes. So imagine a photograph at the very worst is gonna be a completely white photograph or a completely dark black photograph. You might need to, based on your design and your layout, you might need to adjust based on those two extremes. So use good imagery, try it out with beautiful imagery, but then also try it out with a weird gym photo or a bad logo, and then try it out with a white background, try it out with a black background, just so you have that entire gamut covered when it comes to dynamic images, especially if it's gonna have text and icons and even this button here. You can see I've got a button on top of that. And just to make this a little bit, just to have that image bleed through, we're kind of playing around with this 20% white on top of that. Whoop, where'd the image go? We've got this 20% white and it just looks a little bit better if that's a little more blurry. So kind of playing with a blur effect. So layering the blur on the image and then really blurring the call to action on top of there, just so it stands out a bit more. And I'm using the same exact blur on this image, on top of this image that we're kind of starting with. So we've got the smart empty default. Even with the icon here, you don't just want an empty circle. You want to show that this is an avatar or some kind of icon, and we meticulously designed this little avatar icon with the full icon set with the rest of the tab bar and everything like that. So, and even for the profile, you can't assume that they're gonna have a dynamic profile image ready to go. You're gonna have to assume that they haven't uploaded it yet. So you wanna design a nice looking avatar empty state. You know, think about the Twitter egg. They have multicolored backgrounds with the little egg. It's kind of become like a branding thing. And so if you have a chance to, when there are empty states like this, you have a chance to inject a little bit more branding to create a little bit more of a memorable thing. And you just have to kind of consider that when you're considering your empty states for your dynamic images. Okay, so lastly, we're gonna look at the contacts section of this app. So we have a list of all of our contacts. It's kind of one of the main sections in the tab bar. Got a couple of different options here because they weren't sure if they were gonna go with the avatar version or the non-avatar version. And then we have some contact details and things like that. But let me just explain the thinking that I had around these contacts, because this is gonna be a secondary phone line. So this would be kind of imported contacts. Now, you can't guarantee that you're gonna have an image for every single one of your contacts. And what iOS does, they bring in just a gray square and they put in the initials of who the person is gonna be. And that's definitely a good way to handle a contact without a photo, just to give you a little bit more information with their initials in it, similar to what we did here. And because GoDaddy was going through this big rebrand at the time, they have a secondary typeface that's got a really cool look to it that didn't really fit into the utility of the app. So we decided to bring that in as kind of a branded element if there was no image. And again, we're talking about dynamic images here. This is only going to be uploaded by the person using the phone, or if they sync contacts with some other app. We will only get this image if they upload it. And it's not really that helpful to have a bunch of avatars like this repeated over and over and over and over inside of the contacts list. And we could have even incorporated the first name letter and the last name first letter in here, but we wanted to treat that slightly differently because this is my profile, whereas the other one is got all of the contacts on it. And there was a distinction between the contacts that had a photo, the contacts that didn't have a photo, but then also there's people calling that you don't have their contact information. So as a part of the GoDaddy rebrand, they created, the GoDaddy team created a bunch of patterns, like hand-drawn patterns, and they created them where you could overlay them on colors, and here's all the GoDaddy colors. So there's kind of this fun ingredient package that you could use for a lot of different things. And all of these patterns, they're not gonna really make that much sense for an actual phone app. So there's not a lot of place for them in the actual interface, but for things like empty states, this just kind of becomes a really cool thing that you can do, because if you're on your actual conversation thread, you can very quickly distinguish between the people who you've uploaded a photo for, or the unknown callers that you might have had a different conversation with. You've got your contacts that are saved, but they don't actually have the image that you've uploaded. There's been no uploaded images. So what we've done is we've randomly assigned the unknown callers and the people who we don't have their contact info. We've randomly assigned them a pattern and a color based on all of those patterns that we created from the very beginning. So we could randomly assign each different caller one of these patterns. And you could even write a little logic in the code that's like, okay, if this one was just used, don't use it for the next 20, and randomly assign them. And as soon as you use them, don't use these, but use these. And then once you cycle through the remaining 20, then you can start it all over. So it's just an easy way and a fun kind of interesting branding way to create a little bit more value with the empty dynamic images. Instead of just showing an empty state with nothing there, or even just a flat color, it's kind of fun to look for ways like this to incorporate and kind of spice up an empty state for a dynamic image. All right, for our dynamic image homework, I'm gonna get you to design a mobile screen of a contact card for your favorite celebrity, or any random celebrity that you think would be a good fit for what you would want to design. So you can use some of these SmartLine examples if you want for a bit of a reference on the information that you might want to include. But you could really just put anything in there. You could put stats or their phone number, email, just kind of make up some information. Just a fun, simple little one screen profile contact card for a celebrity. Use a background image if you want to. Use a really nice image of a headshot, and really focus on using great images, really good images that would make it seem really nice. And if you want, you can put some of the information on top of the image just to kind of experiment with the dynamic quality. So once you've got your first one done, then I want you to duplicate that, take the exact same layout and put in like just really bad imagery. Like search for whatever it calls for, whatever you can find that it just doesn't have to be vulgar or anything like that. Just a bad image, just not good lighting, not good composition, and put those photos in there, but don't change a thing between the two layouts, and see if the design and the integrity of your design still holds up without the beautiful images of the celebrity. And then once you've got that, create a third version that has no images in it whatsoever, and try to make it seem like a nice looking page. Maybe there's colors, maybe there's patterns, or maybe you have a random assortment of photos that you're pulling from. Think about the Twitter egg model, think about the call papers that we had on the SmartLine project. But in that third one, just create like a nice empty state, knowing that if someone signed up for this app, they haven't given us any information yet. So we want to make it look nice and pleasant even before those dynamic images have been uploaded. So I can't wait to see what you come up with, and best of luck.